And what I said earlier, it's about the quality of education. And so those college professors went on strike. It was a principled strike. They weren't striking. It wasn't full-time college professors that were striking because they wanted more money. It wasn't about more money. It was about part-time, precarious instructors. So what you end up getting when you pay good money to be in school is you get a part-time instructor that may or may not be there next semester, that may or may not have the time to pay attention to your particular needs. And so we are not, this is not a race to the bottom. We do not want to have, as I said earlier, you've got free tuition, but what you have to look at, what is it you're getting for your money? And so at the very front line of good quality education for students that pay their money and are there to learn is that your professors are there and that they can be counted on and that they are also paid and treated like professionals. So that's the environment in which you want to learn. I mean, there's a strike going on right now that is not being resolved. And then, at the last minute, the government, legislated professors back to work and didn't really create great provisions for students some of them have lost academic years. Some of them really essentially got a year in, but, let's be honest, there was a lot less learning that happened in those situations. So an NDP government wouldn't have let that happen in the first place. They have good relationships, good labor relationships. They understand the value of professors, and they understand that these are working people that need to be treated fairly just as students are. And I could honestly, I can say that that's part of the reason why I'm proud to be an NDP candidate, because those are the kinds of things that we would completely fight against and not allow to happen.
I believe he also wanted to hear some good news for international students, so maybe just a line of good news for international students.
Good news for international students? Well, I think the good news for international students is that we continue to understand the contribution that international students make to our communities and to our economy, to be frank, and that there are many ways and provisions that should be put in place and that we would put in place to make sure that if you're an international student and you like it here, that we will make a transition easily that you will be transitioned more easily into our communities, and so that you come here and that you can see that this is a community where you would like to live and where you would like to raise your family, and so that some of the things we talked about earlier, the quality of life, not just as a student, the things that you will be graduating into, the kinds of communities that you want to live in, the fact that you want to have affordable housing, the fact that you can afford to pay your hydro bill, those are the kinds of things that we'll be focusing on to ensure that international students, if they choose to stay, will recognize that this is a province where they can raise a family and feel welcomed and have a good life here.
On.
Well, before I say anything, I want to first apologize to Sandy for things I'm about to say. You talk about the NDP government, and I just want to point out to everyone here, I think most of you were very young. I was very young when NDP last formed a government in 1990 to 95. They created chaos with the labor unions. The Raid days, people still remember that. They want people work for free. They don't want to pay for them. So I don't think they have a very proud track record when it comes to labor negotiations. What happened recently was that the governing party, the Liberal Party, believes that there is great value in collective bargaining. We let the employer and the union who represent the employee to negotiate, and we believe that's the best way to come to agreement. Unfortunately, the negotiation went very long, longer than we would like. So in the third week, we've indicated to both parties, look, if you guys can't find a solution, we are going to step in. We give them every opportunity that we could to allow for a settlement, and they did not settle. And as a government, we couldn't wait any longer. Students were suffering. So on the end of the fourth week, on Fridays, as you know, we don't sit in the parliament, the premier called an emergency extension of the legislature. We all went back on Friday. We sat through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, passed the legislation to order arbitration must be reached by these two parties. So it was not a situation we like to see. And I want to point out that legislation could have passed on Friday. We set 2 extra days. Why? Because the third party, NDP, led by Andrea Horwath, stalled every single step of the way. They stalled every single step away, and then they had the gall to come back the second week and start questioning on behalf of the students. Excuse me? So I being in that legislature, I was offended because I'm a sort of first-term MPP. I've never seen this before. On one end, during question period, you're asking the government, why don't you do something to end the strike? On the other hand, you stall every single minute you can to a legislation to get the people back to work. So I think it's coming. It's a bit rich coming from the NDP. I do want to point out, in the end, the money that's saved by the college because of the strike create a pot of money that government established a fund to compensate students if they had suffered any loss during ticket rearrangement or lease or anything like that, up to $500. Though no money that went back to the college, it was created to support the students for that loss of time. I know it's not enough, it's not close to compensate the time loss, but that's the best we could do in that situation. In terms of international students, as the PA, I've toured the entire province to consult with students, faculty, and colleges, universities to come up with a plan. And I have to tell you, I can't tell you too much about the plan, but it will be announced very soon, and it will be the first in this province that address international education, and you will be pleased. Thank you.
Well, I will let you rebuttal. I do want to let Pauline get a say first.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear what you're saying. International students are getting, I think, gouged. And if you can have people go from the United States and Canada to countries like Sweden and Norway and go to school for free, then perhaps we could at least have something reasonable and comparable to what the local people pay. That would be my own opinion. That's not necessarily the opinion of the Green Party, but I think it's reasonable. I was a teacher and the union rep when we had Ray Days back in the time, and everybody thought that was horrible, and then we got Harris and the Conservatives, and we were wishing for Bob Ray back. So I'm not all that offended by Bob Ray's NDP government. There's always worse. Unions are great. The Green Party is officially in support of unions. Unions have given us things like weekends, and I was very proud to be a member of the Federation of Women Teachers Associations of Ontario, FWTAO, and because of that, my first experience as a student where I was paid half of my male colleagues because I was female, and because I was paid on staff and they were paid hourly. That did not happen in teaching. And I went from starting in 1980 with the Peel Board, which was rife with the good old boys, and the good old boys started being principals and being promoted when they were like 23, and I've been teaching for a year because they were male. Now, if you go to most of the schools, I don't know the statistics, but probably at least 50% of the administration is female now. We don't have a glass ceiling. The only thing we haven't had so far is Director of Education as a female. Other than that, we've had females all the way through. And unions have done that. So we have a lot to thank unions for. And the compensation, I don't know exactly what the answer is for you because of the strike. But the Green Party's position on the professors and teachers is that they should have a solid contract of at least three courses to teach, and then that makes it standardized and not precarious, so that everybody can relax and just do what they're doing. Thank
I'm
you.
going to let Sandy have a quick
Quick.
rebuttal and wrap up.
So I don't think it's very helpful to be talking about something that happened 30 years ago, and I don't think people are, this scary boogeyman is anything that people are going to pay attention to because they've seen what's happened in the interim. And I will just say two things. One is Bob Rae is a liberal. Let's start with that. And Andrea Horvath is no Bob Rae. And what the NDP and Andrea Horvath were doing was to try to stand up for students to ensure that they had quality education and stand up for the rights of people to make some determination about what happens in their workplace. So if you don't have the ability as a worker and you don't have ability as a student to stand up, what do we have in this province? What is it? What are our values and what do we stand for? And the very fact that this sort of cynical twist to make it seem that the 2 days over a long weekend where the NDP held up a back-to-work legislation is what was the problem is really short-sighted, and I think people can see through that. Did I say Bob Rae's a liberal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.